Okay. So it and I don't know why I'm so off here. I think it's because I just finished up doing my morning piece, and so I haven't, this switch over is a little faster than normal. So okay, so welcome again, and I am today in one of those, I guess, introspective moods. When you told me that you had watched or were watching The Power of Myth, which is a documentary of how do I want to say it? What do you call it? It was a show that was done between Joseph Campbell and Bill Moyer over seems like a span of time, where they talked about just that, the power of myth. I watched it years ago and went out, and I actually used to have two of these books, but I bought the book that was a transcription of the conversation because it was so, for me, it gave me a different way of looking at the world. How has it landed on you so far?
The same way. I had never heard of him, and I was in a library somewhere and saw the book, and it was the Many Faces of the Hero. And I started to pick it up, and then serendipity, I go home and somehow it's on PBS, this conversation with Bill Moyers and this gentleman I had never heard of, Joseph Campbell, who was this man who had immersed himself into the religious stories and the spiritual paths of cultures all over the world and from various time epochs of this planet. And so what he was illuminating was that there are certain stories in cultures all over the world from thousands of years that denote a struggle of a hero who goes through trials and tribulations and comes out on the other side. And he was referencing that all of these stories had the power of helping us to understand that is the course of each individual being on this planet. And this is your work. And that this is a common thread of cultures and times. And I just found that just marvelous, just marvelous.
Yeah, yeah. And that's a good way of putting it. One of the things that I think he woke up in me was the symbols that we see. Like, a lot of times we don't look and at life in a symbolic way. We look at it very, very much on the surface without knowing how different things inform our psyche, our culture. All of these things are, when we begin to look a little bit deeper, they are speaking to us. One of the first things that he talked about was the emphasis that societies put on finances, on religion, politics, and even medicine. Did you have you seen that part?
I have seen that part. I'm not sure exactly what you're referencing, but I know that what he has repeatedly illustrated over and over again is that there's something sacred in our life. And no matter what mundane task you think you're performing, you should be able to find the sacred spot in the task.
Mm-hmm.
Because I just got finished listening to his discussion about eternity and how we are programmed to think that there's a past and there's a future, and eternity is out there somewhere to happen, as opposed to right now in the moment. This is eternal, and that our job is, no matter what the mundane task that you're doing, find the connection between you and the divine. If it's with another being, find the divine in that being. Find the sacredness in the task that you're performing with this divine being in this eternal moment. And that way, your life always has purpose, and you're not always waiting for something else to happen, for the epiphany to come, for heaven to come, as opposed to, I'm finding it right here, right now. If my life ends right here and right now, I found it. I'm in the moment.
Yes, yes. And and that is such a good thing. We hear the term the eternal moment of now. But a lot of times when people think about eternity, it's somewhere off, right? Like what you were saying, is somewhere off someplace else. But if what we do is recognize within this now moment, this that first off, that this is all we have, and then once you connect into this and recognize that at this moment, he talks about this idea of the unseen hand or the unseen forces. He is also the one who talked about, I love how he breaks down terms and ideas for us. Like, even what a metaphor is, what an analogy is, and how those differ. And then finding within our own space where all of these things collide, or where they all come together. So he says in the show, he says that it used to be that the tallest building in a city was a religious institution.
Right.
I know when I was in school in Italy, you would see Il Duomo, which is the church structure, and that
Right.
would be sitting in the center of town. It
That's
always
right.
seemed like it was sitting up high, and that no matter where you were in the town was structured so that
That's
you
right.
could see that symbol, putting that at the center of life. And it's unlike our churches, where our churches you go into and you sit down and you're supposed to hear a sermon. It was rare that you went into a church there and saw seating.
I share your experience. I had the opportunity of going to Italy um, to tour the medieval churches, and the significant difference between churches here. Some achieve it, but most don't. But number one is that they're built in such a way as to give you the experience that there's something greater than yourself. So with the high arches when you walk in, you're dwarfed, number one. Then, but again, a lot of these churches, a lot of the medieval churches were built by masons. master craftsmen who understood occult mysteries of life and put up all of that into the building. So they had a certain number of steps. But one of the things that my experience was that I had no idea of, we look and we'll see the postcards or pictures of these medieval churches, and you'll see the Leaning Tower of Pisa, not realizing that all of those medieval churches had three structures. They had the sanctuary, which was always built in the image of a cross. There was the bell tower that you could access from inside, but was also outside. And that the bell tower was very narrow, and it was very difficult for two people to be on those steps at the same time. The roof of the bell tower was very small, so that you had to bend your head down to climb this circular spiral all the way to the top. And that's where the priest would go day in and day out. The steps were worn into a groove because they kept going up and down, and then they would ring the bell. And there's something mystical about that rising of the Kundalini spirit, such that when it hits the pineal gland, you get, the whole bell explosion. And then the third building was the baptistry, where they had outside, that was the water or the female energy, and the symbolism of also delving into the unconscious. That all of these churches had those three in one structure formation that, if you don't go there, you're never have the opportunity to experience. Right. And that was one of the things that Campbell kept bringing up over and over again, is that the symbolism of words and scriptures are obstructions and barriers to the experience of God, and that you can talk about it, but that's not that's not the bliss that you're looking for. That's not the transformational aspect that you need. You have to have experience, which is what alters the energy. And back to your point, alters the DNA, and then the behavior changes, and then the expression changes.
Yes, absolutely. And so it used to be, because even here, when you look around Cleveland, if you go down to Public Square, there is a church there, mm-hmm. which is not unlike most cities. At the center of the town, there was a church that was built. But now the church is dwarfed by the symbols that are of power now in our city.
Of the secular world, and usually financial.
Yes.
That the God of money supersedes the eternal transcendent God of the divinity. Yes. Yes. Yes.
So it was the church that was there. Then we had what's the other the what do you call that other building?
Politics.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
There's the building that sits over there. It's not called Terminal Tower. Is it Terminal Tower?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. And then they brought in the BP building.
Right.
And I'm not and there's something else that is there, but all of that overshadows now the church that used to be at the center.
And don't we as a society and culture live our lives that way? Church is something that a lot of us go to on Sunday. Maybe during the week, especially during the pandemic, people were at home and they'll do a Bible study. But it's a segment of your life instead of it is the fundamental principle from which you live your life, and everything else is an aspect of my spiritual journey. How I treat my children, how I treat my mate, how I treat my relatives, how I treat my finances, how I take care of myself, my health and wellness are all aspects of this journey for me to connect to the divine, versus, well, I got everything else that I'm doing, and then over here I have my spiritual concerns.
It was so illuminating for me as he started putting it in perspective. Even just how the myths that he talks about throughout the world, and
Yeah.
how at their core there are certain similarities but also certain differences. But then what he looks for is the connecting line that goes through all of them, trying to figure out, or saying to us that just because the symbols appear to be different doesn't necessarily mean that they are different. And I think at one point he talks about the Egyptian system, and he talks about oh, what is it that oh, I can't call it now, but I find all of that, whether we're talking about the paintings that appear in caves, or we're talking about the things that appear on a papyrus, it just, all of these things, as we look at them, cultures that did not necessarily seem as though they were in proximity to one another, still had
Right.
the same symbols throughout. I just find it fascinating.
And that's when he brought up the work of Carl Jung, who says that in the unconscious life of human beings, there are just these fundamental elementary concepts that we all have, that many times show up in our dreams, but also it is what the mythologies were based on. And yes, there may be some variations, but because there's this archetype of mother, that we have this idea of this female energy that nurtures and nourishes us, and that gives rise in a mythological story about a goddess, or about our relationship to our earth, our relationship to our own mothers. There's always the archetype of the warrior, and how this protective energy somehow must be invoked at certain times. But the idea that these stories were something that a culture could operate around and unify the culture, and that is lost now for the most part in the modern world. We don't have a unifying mythology in a culture. So, and because we don't have a mythology, the spiritual life is impoverished because of it, because the myths that we're following are not designed to lead us to the eternal truths. So the myth of, well, get a good education so you can get a good job, so you can make enough money so you can have, a couple of homes, nice cars, this and that and the other. That's the quote unquote American dream. We have these kinds of myths that have taken the place of the original myths, which serve to connect us to the divine way of life. And that was his way of saying that because people who live out in nature, whose lives are governed by natural sunlight, by the changing of the seasons, farmers, people of that type, they have a much more profound connection with the divine because they see it all around it, as they see their atmosphere and energy and habitat change. We live in such an artificial habitat, well, if it's dark outside, we just turn on the light. If we need to go over here, we just get in our car and go. We don't have to walk on a path. We don't have to go through the forest. We don't have to do certain things. And so we can kind of alienate ourselves from the natural cycle of life, but it's to our detriment, not our benefit. We call it convenient, but it actually is to our detriment.
Yeah, well, I think that one of the things that I used to talk about is that one of the things that we see in religion is that, for me, my perspective is that there's been a wedge that is put between man and nature, and they don't want us to know that that is a source, like a fountain from which we can drink in order to know ourselves better. So and to some extent, I think that it is not only purposeful, but it is something that that we pass along to our children as if somehow it's dirty, or that there needs to be some detachment. One of the things that Joseph Campbell pointed out was especially in the Native American culture, that they didn't just kill animals just to kill them. They killed them for the purpose of it being fed, and then they thanked them for sacrificing their life to feed our own. So there was a respect between nature, a
Absolutely.
respect between, for the life that we were taking. So, and we see it played out over and over again, because it works to keep people asleep.
Um, and to your point, it's getting worse and we have to fight harder against it. Like, it used to be television had turned into the babysitter. Now it's the iPad and the phone. And so if mom and dad is busy, give the child an electronic device.
Mm,
When we were younger, it was get out of the house,
right.
go outside with all that noise. So we were always in the grass, in the dirt, climbing the trees, always outside, where we could have the experience of the rain, of the snow, of watching the seasons change, go from spring to fall. But now if you're connected to the electronic device all the time, and if we follow some of what they have aimed for us, the upgrading with the neural link, putting a chip into your brain or a chip into your hand. So now you can wave it past the vending machine and have something pop out, or you sign yourself in and out to your place of work with your hand. You can also turn on your computer with your mind if you've got the neural link in the brain. You can give it commands with your thoughts. But all of these things we have the capability of doing anyway. But this whole attempt, as I think you told me that you used to watch Star Wars.
Yep.
I'm sorry, not Star Wars, Star Trek.
I watch both.
And so the cyborg, the organic beings who were part machine. And this is kind of what is on the forefront for our future if we don't fight against it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that one of the things that I this is an ongoing, do I want to call it a programming, the way that they introduce things into our thoughts, into our consciousness, into certain things, to prepare people, to
Yes.
gradually introduce people to particular ideas, so that over time, they are, as they start to roll these things out, they want to get folks on board. So even if it is self-driving cars or trucks on the highway, they roll them out in increments, so that they get people to a place where they find things, or where they are more acceptable. I am, even when it comes down to how we how we feed ourselves, going into the store, and no longer do we see, go into a butcher shop and see a cow or a half of a cow, but rather we see everything up under wrappers, and is totally detached from the life that it has come from, or the life that has had to sacrifice something in order for it to be. And we don't recognize that living entity that we are now ingesting to be a part of us had a life and emotions, and was being fed and cared for the purpose of it being in these plastic wrappers in the refrigerated section of the store, and how that then impacts the person who ingests that as well.
We are disconnected from so many aspects of our existence, not knowing what it takes to produce the produce that you go into the grocery store to get, the effort that it takes, the kinds of seeds that they're putting in the ground, to your point, or the life of the animal that you're going to eat. Was it humanely kept? Was this bird or this cow or this sheep, what was the circumstances of its life? Or was it tortured on one of the factory farms? Did it live its life shoulder to shoulder with no room? As opposed to how, when we're driving on the highway and you see a farm and the cows are all spread out in the pasture, and they've got room. Or were they on this factory farm where they were shoulder to shoulder, knee deep in their own manure, and there's a pool of manure down the stream that's polluting the water table of all the land nearby? And then were the cows then hit in the head with a big plug and then slaughtered? And did one cow see the other cow getting slaughtered? Was it starting to scream and cry? Did it watch its calf go through all of this so that we could get some veal? Were the chickens that they have to have their wings broken because they have a certain, they've got to get four into a space, and that they have their beaks sawed off because they'll peck each other to death because there's no room? Is that what you're eating? Do you understand that? So, but we're divorced from that. We're sanitized from a lot of the natural experiences of the world, and consequently we're leading artificial lives.
Yes, yes. No longer connected. So there is so much that we miss out on, that we are divorced from, because of what he talks about, sometimes this idea of agriculture versus industrialization, and the things that have had to change so that we could have the cities that we have, or the industries that we have. He talks about, and this was something that I thought was also relevant to you, was this idea of the shaman or the medicine man that they always had, or that a society or a culture has, those people who are appointed to do that. And he asked a really interesting question about that during the midst of the conversation. And he asked a question about who ordains a shaman to be a shaman.
That's an interesting question. And so my experience has been that true shamans have a certain energetic configuration that, quote, they are necessarily born a certain way and different. And I'll tell you this, in that when I first, my early career in medicine, it was the people that I knew who were really good at what they were doing only ever wanted to be doctors. They had no other thought about anything else. And whether or not they were being treated fairly, not treated fairly, being paid well, not being paid well, it was what they were designed to do. And so what I noticed that in indigenous societies in America, it sometimes runs in lines, in that grandmother may have had several grandchildren, but there was one that she would take with her when she made her walk into the forest to pick up this herb and that herb, to make a tea, to make a salve, to do something. And so a lot of times they recognized who was next in the line to become that. And shamans also, nothing in life is serendipity or coincidence. And many times their apprentice comes to them in a certain fashion and understanding, okay, I can read your energy. You're the one to be here. I'm supposed to deposit what I know into you. It's not that so much that we say, I'm going to be a shaman. Yes, you can do that, but you'll never be the epitome of what one is to be, because a shaman has it's multifunction, which is how healers were in the past.
Mhm.
Most healers were priests. They tended to the spiritual and emotional needs because that's where the healing begins. And then their knowledge of the herbs and the plants and the various techniques and the sounds and the music or the rhythm or the color that was also needed was something else that they added. But they also had to be connected to the divine to understand what the problem was and what level it is, so that I can work on it at that level.
Yeah. Yeah, and to your point, one of the things that he said is that, you know, that a lot of things now man ordains. We want to, you know,
Right,
if you
right.
go and you go through this many years of school and you go through the hoops that they say, then you figure out that, or you take on a position or a title that says this. He says, but shamans are appointed by God. You
Yeah.
know, that it's not something that you could just go out and say, you know, I'm going to do this, but rather there is that what you have just described. You step into something that was already meant for you. So I think that being able to look at just the, you know, even when we talk about the place, so we've talked about a little bit about the what place the religious institutions or God has in the society, the economics and where those are, the politics and where those are. But also now we have this where it didn't seem to have a place before, medicine in our society. And 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 how complex it has become. And if you go by the way that Joseph Campbell looks at things, the prominence that it holds in our city now is not just because it's world-class care. It's because now people are so sick because they are not, because there's a part of us that is rejecting the program that we're operating under right now. And so,
Well,
okay,
medicine is a business.
yes.
And I used to say with some like-minded colleagues, wouldn't it be nice if everybody got well and we could retire and do something else? But understand now, for the most part, medicine doesn't really cure most chronic ailments. It maintains it. It doesn't cure your arthritis, even though you may have the knee replacement or the hip replacement. It doesn't cure your hypertension. You're going to need to take your medicine on a regular basis, ad infinitum. It doesn't cure diabetes. You're going to need to take your medicine ad infinitum. The autoimmune diseases. And so, and rather than trying to find or at least really integrate the herbal medicines, the supplements, the homeopathy, the other techniques that other cultures use, it's about finding a molecule that we can patent, because once we patented it, now we can make money off of it. And so we were talking about how the church was the largest building in the center of the city, and then the other structures, primarily finance. And medicine has become a business. It is, number one, they proved when President Obama wanted to give everybody health insurance that a lot of people don't consider it a right. A lot of the politicians don't consider healthcare a right. But it's always been the responsibility of a culture to heal its citizens, to look after them. Why? Because we understand that we are connected, that there's a unity among us, that if one of us is damaged or ailing, it's going to affect the quality of the whole. But because we lost that mythology, because we lost that understanding, now it's how can I exploit whatever it is that I can exploit to the benefit of myself and a few others at the expense of other people. And medicine is a business.
You know, and thank you. That is so, I mean, you're so on point with that. But from what I understand, medicine was always perceived as a right up until slavery ended in this country.
Mm.
And then they did not want it to be a right for all. And
Okay.
so an effort to deny parts of this country, I mean, there has been so many things that have been has been trying to deny a people a particular right or a particular advantage. There's been this effort to not address the healthcare needs of Black folks here in this country. And so there has, from the readings that I have done, that was in part the effort to kind of deny folks this right. And it's amazing the lengths to what people will go to carry on this racism in this country.
And again, how we started is the loss of mythologies. Mm-hmm. If you don't have a unifying core mythology, then the society is going to suffer. We no longer recognize the underlying unity that we all share. So what goes around comes around. If we were the ones who were criminalized for the drug issue, well, then expect to have an opioid epidemic where so many of the dominant culture are dying now because it started with us being criminalized. That's part of the whole, that whole gestalt of, if you're going to mistreat a certain segment of the population, don't think it's going to stop there. That's where it will start, but it will, that corruption and that rot will invade the entire society.
Yeah,
I'm going to have to
karma is
get moving though.
Thank
Yeah.
you so much for this.
Thank
Have
you.
an amazing day. I will
And you
see you
too.
next week.
All right, my
All
sister.
right. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Peace.
you. Bye. All right, y'all. My dogs have gotten restless in the midst of that. I had to actually turn off my mic. And so it is time for me to get off of here and get on with the rest of my day. But I love, love, love these conversations. I mean, there's so much to that. If you have not seen The Power of Myth with Bill Moyer and Joseph Campbell, you owe it to yourself to watch that. You don't have to read it, you can watch it. He says it's on PBS. It is also something that you could check out of the library. It is available, widely available, and it is extremely informative. It's not, you don't get all the pop and circumstances. There's no car chases, no shoot 'em ups, none of that stuff. It's just two men talking, and with a reverence for life, and it's really worthy of your attention. So I thank you for being here, and I'll see you when I see you. I'll be here tomorrow in the 8 o'clock hour, and I hope you have an amazing, terrific Thursday. All right, bye. I can take my doggies out now.